is John Brown, and today we are going to be talking about how to gain weight and specifically how to put on muscle. And this is very important, definitely in the off season for a lot of sports like football, and it's actually something I've dealt with myself, and it's actually been my hardest challenge in fitness is putting on weight. So I'll talk to you a little bit about, first of all, what the science says about this, and then relate my experiences throughout. So we first need to talk about what are the conditions for growth? What do you need to get bigger? Probably the most important aspect of this, or the hardest to achieve, is getting enough calories. Some athletes can need 5,000 calories or more a day to maintain, let alone grow. So making sure they get enough can be a really difficult task for both the dietitian and the athlete, and it takes a lot of planning and coordination. To add a pound a week, you need to gain or consume 500 more calories than you burn on a daily basis, which might be achievable on some days, but to maintain consistently is the difficult part, and we'll talk about how to handle that moving forward. We also need to make sure we're getting enough protein, so about 14 grams more protein than we burn. And we don't necessarily burn protein, but we use it for metabolic functions. We can burn protein, but it's definitely not optimal, and that's usually not a factor in this situation. But most people do get enough protein, but it's the timing of the protein that is a factor, and we'll talk about that. You also need an adequate training stimulus. If the muscle doesn't need repaired much, you probably won't grow much, and that's just the way it is. We have protein that can do other things, and if the body isn't pushed to the limit to where it thinks I'm going to need more muscle the next time I put myself through this, you just really can't expect results. And then if you pair an inadequate training stimulus with excess calories and protein, you'll probably end up actually putting on fat instead of muscle, which is definitely not optimal. Sleep is important. We can't understate that. Sleep plays a big role in our recovery, both for our physical recovery, our muscle growth, but also our brain and other parts of our body really need that sleep to recover. So 7 to 8 hours is, I would say, mandatory for anyone trying to gain muscle. Also, hydration is very important. Water flows with muscles, so we don't want to starve them. We want to keep them happy and hydrated, just like the rest of our body. We also need to get plenty of carbohydrates. That is often overlooked in terms of athletic performance, but athletes actually tend to be low in carbohydrates, and carbohydrate is our preferred source of fuel. It's what we run best on, and when we have our carbohydrate stores replenished, then we can build muscle more efficiently than if we're low on carbohydrate, because then the concern is, at least from our body's perspective, is that's our main fuel source. We need that now, so it'll invest more resources into replenishing the carbohydrate, and instead of building the muscle, which is what we want. So don't be afraid to eat carbohydrates, and keep that in mind moving forward. So this is just a basic little graph. So this is what a normal day looks like when we're talking about muscle protein synthesis. So the green is muscle protein synthesis, and this increases every time we eat. This goes up. So here's breakfast, here's lunch, and here's dinner. In a normal person who's eating right, they're burning as much calories as they're consuming. Their training load isn't too much, and their protein and calories are both a net number. We can expect something like this. So outside of those meal times, I guess there is a breakdown that occurs within our muscle. It doesn't look like this exactly, but there is an oscillation. So this is why it's so hard to gain muscle, is because our body has, these mechanisms built in that try to maintain our internal environment. So when we eat, we store protein. That's what you're seeing. On the scale, we're starting here at 0, and then this +1 and -1 are just arbitrary numbers, but plus would be gain, minus would be lost. So what happens is when we eat, we store this protein, and with an adequate training load, some of it turns into muscle. And then we go through this period. Let's call this, this is between breakfast and lunch. So between breakfast and lunch, we haven't eaten, we've stored all of our nutrients. Our body shifts into a phase where we start burning that protein. So we start burning it, we start using it for things, and then we eat again, and then we have lunch, and then we store again, and then we go back, we digest all that, and then it gets broken down again. So you can see how over time this results in just a neutral effect. If you take the net of the synthesis and the breakdown, you're going to be about even. So we have to manipulate this in a way to increase our protein synthesis. And this is one way to do it. This is from Dr. Phillips from McMaster University. And what he's showing is that by eating more meals throughout the day, noted you must give yourself time to digest between meals, you can go in the net positive with the protein synthesis. So you eat, your synthesis goes up, it starts to go back down, and then before it gets too low, then you eat again, and then the net positive will help you gain muscle. And that's a way to combat the breakdown, is eating more than 3 meals a day. So maybe 4 or 5, maybe even 6 if you time it right. But one thing to note with this timing is that you can't just have a massive serving of protein in one meal and expect it to have the same result as spreading that out between 2 meals, because we do have a limit on the amount of protein that can be converted to muscle at a given time. So protein actually, it doesn't stay around for too long before it gets converted to something else. If you consume too much protein at once, some of that will be converted to fat or carbohydrate, because protein has an ability to do that. And if we have protein sitting around and our body sees no use for protein, that's what will happen. It'll get converted to a carbohydrate or a fat, and then eventually get stored as fat. Then we got fat instead of muscle. So that's really important to think about. And that number is about 30 grams of protein a meal, give or take. There's always room for biological differences, but so if you're eating much more than 30 grams of protein a meal, the odds of the excess getting stored as muscle is quite low. And again, if you're someone like J.J. Watt, then that guy could probably consume 50 grams of protein, but not all of us are NFL players, so that's something to keep in mind. So when it comes down to it, the important things that you need to know to increase growth are timing is vitally important. You need to space your meals throughout the day to make sure, first of all, you have time to digest. So anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, between meals. You want to eat too fast between, because then it's basically the same meal. You want to make sure your protein is high quality. So your complete proteins, your animal proteins, they'll give you the greatest anabolic response. That's really important. But this can be achieved through plant-based proteins as well. You just might need to be more diligent about how to pair those together to make complete protein, the total effect of the response might not be as strong as with an animal-based protein. You also need to manage the protein load like we talked about. So there's really that 30 grams give or take that essentially maxes out your benefit from the protein. Granted, the added calories could help you meet your calorie goal, but you really want to make sure you're spacing your protein throughout the day. You do want to plan ahead and meal prep. So if you are trying to gain weight and you're serious about it, it's tough. And like I said, I've done it myself. What I would do is I would pack a sandwich and a piece of fruit, and I would eat that between my breakfast and lunch meal, and I would do that again between my lunch and dinner meal before my training session. So that helps me gain quite a bit of weight, and it can be tough. You also want to make sure you're getting high calorie foods, so knowing what are high calorie foods and how to add calories to your foods. So you want to plan ahead and meal prep. This might mean making some chicken that you prep for the week. You can use that for sandwiches, for wraps. Keep some veggies cut in the fridge. Bring some fruit with you. Anything like that. There's all sorts of ways to make this work. You just gotta really plan ahead and be diligent. Plan your next meal. Don't just kind of expect to stumble into the kitchen and find something great, or if you're at work or whatever, that can be a deal too. Or if you're at school, you can't always just run up and go to the cafeteria if you're not, you're still in class kind of thing. You need to have food on you, and you need to prepare for that. So high calorie foods are really important when it comes to gaining weight, because they will help us meet our caloric goal. So knowing what those are, anything high in fat is going to be high calorie. Anything high in protein, usually you get the best of both worlds when you get high fat and high protein, which just happens to be usually in animal foods. So things like cheese, milk, any meat really, eggs. Then also like oils, so like olive oil. Try to keep your health in mind too, though, because you don't want to get too out of control with the animal foods, because that's not always good either. And then supplements, that's really on an individual basis. Not everyone needs a supplement to gain weight. For some, it might help, but that's something to talk with a dietitian about to see if something like that would be right for you. And I hope you all learned something today. Thanks for listening.